The next session is making sense of the random, using AI to discover, solve, and create. Experience and judgment are no longer enough to make critical decisions about business or life. Artificial intelligence is taking blind spots and prejudice out of understanding and decision making. The learning machines can be trained to collect, organize, correlate, and evaluate the amount of data and even conclude the appropriate response, all at a speed and scale that is impossible for humans to do. These machines can listen, answer, execute, and exhibit instructions and even taste, appreciate sentiments, understand people, and predict actions and events. These machines make the dauntingly complex tasks elementary and argument human-like no machine has done before. So the panel that's with us here is Vikram Chandra, consulting editor of NDTV, Jim Sporer, director of Cognitive Open Tech Group, IBM, and Anand Chandrasekaran, director of Facebook. Interactions with the audience will follow, and we'll have concluding remarks by P.K. Agrawal, CEO and Dean of Northeastern University in Silicon Valley, and also the former Chief Technology Officer of State of California. We will also be, by the way, right after the session is over, we will not be having reception outside, but at the back here, we'll have wonderful pakoras and bhaji and all the other stuff that's coming, masala tea. So don't go away, don't go outside. We'll have it right back there. With that, without any further ado, I will have Jim Sporer, which I have known for a long time, and he's the man who funded my first course in IBM Watson, which I taught here at Berkeley. And IBM paid for it, and we did very well with it. And so I will have him kind of come and talk to us about it. And he has a new title called Open Tech, Director of Open Tech Cognitive Systems. And would you please say your remarks?
And I think I'll just stay here. And since time is short, I'll be as concise as I can. I really do want to start by thanking Professor Solomon Darwin. We've heard a lot of people thank him today, but he has been a real pioneer of teaching artificial intelligence to students. And I think there's a lot of people who've done a lot of great work in teaching artificial intelligence, but what's unique about Professor Solomon Darwin's work is that he really teaches the students to think about the new business models and value propositions and think about how artificial intelligence is going to change society in really profound ways. So I want to thank you for being a great pioneer of AI education. And I also, since we're here at Berkeley, I have to give a shout out to two other faculty at Berkeley who are doing some of the most wonderful pioneering work in artificial intelligence. So if you don't know the work of Peter Abil, he is one of the driving forces behind teaching robots to learn. And if you haven't seen his excellent videos on his website of everything from teaching robots to fold towels to teaching robots to run in simulated worlds, it's really inspiring work. Ken Goldberg is also a pioneer of AI here at Berkeley, and he's been doing state-of-the-art work teaching robot surgery. So when you think about surgery and the very delicate hand movements, Ken Goldberg is really a leader here in that. And I also have to do a shout out to Jean-Paul Jacob, who's in the back and has been a great collaborator between IBM and Berkeley over the years, and AI and many other areas. So anyway, those are my thank yous. my new role at IBM, I've had a number of roles over the years. I've been with IBM for 20 years, helped start the venture capital group, the service science area, led our global university programs. But for the last 4 months, I've been leading IBM's efforts in open source artificial intelligence. And I think one of the main things that you all should know, if you don't know it, this is an opportunity to really learn this. Most of the major IT companies have open sourced their artificial intelligence, deep learning, a lot of their data sets. You know, have to give a shout out to Google for TensorFlow, Facebook for PyTorch and Torch. A lot of the work that's happening in artificial intelligence is open source, and there's a lot of great open data sets out there. This is allowing a much closer collaboration between students and faculty and industry and advancing this at an incredibly rapid rate. And I think just to kind of wrap up with a couple of thoughts to help. And by the way, if anybody wants to see slides on any of this, visuals, I put all my presentations up on SlideShare, so slideshare.net/Spora has more of a visual thing. But the thing to think about is that, you know, digital workers are coming, and by about 2035, a digital worker will cost about $1,000 a year. So there's lots of different ways to think about that, but when I talk to students, and I'll tell you about some students that I mentored in just a minute, when I talk to students about the future, I ask them, what would you do if you had 100 people working for you? And that's really how students are going to have to prepare for the future of artificial intelligence. When you can have a digital worker for $1,000, the ability to have lots of people working for you is going to be a big difference in the future. A lot of digital workers working for everyone. And I had some high school students contact me that wanted me to be their mentor, and they were very bright. They had won several science fair competitions, students at Cupertino. They asked me, you know, what should we do, Jim? Be our mentor, help us be successful in the future. And I said, learn IBM's Watson Bluemix, our AI stuff on the cloud. And I told them, I said, look, when I was in high school, when I was your age, I was programming on punch cards. And I loved it. I thought it was great. But you students have access to building artificial intelligence systems with speech recognition, image recognition, all these great capabilities for free. So they learned it. I was very proud. 6 months after they learned it, they entered the AT&T programming competition and won $20,000 in 24 hours. So you can prepare for the future of artificial intelligence, but you have to get into it. You have to start thinking about, what do I do with all this great capability? How do I set the bar higher with this great capability? That's my message. And thank you, Solomon, for being a great pioneer of teaching AI at Berkeley.
Oh, thank you very much. One question for you. Could AI exceed human ingenuity and replace people in thinking jobs? And then, you know, what will we come to a point where we won't have not much to do?
We were always going to have lots to do if we set our ambitions high enough. I think there's, in the presentation that I have online, I go through the benefits of artificial intelligence. I go through the risks of artificial intelligence. What are the biggest risks of artificial intelligence? I'm not so worried about super intelligent AI for decades and decades, nor will I ever be worried about super intelligent AI. I am worried about bad people that use technology for bad purposes. That's a much more realistic thing. That's today. It's always been true. So that's where, you know, if there's bad things that are going to happen, it's because bad people are going to use the technology in bad ways. And that's been true forever. But I do think if in my charts, you'll see I've got, people have a hard time understanding Moore's law, so I came up with this really simple diagram that shows petascale computing, exascale computing, the costs changing. There's like a factor of a 1,000 cost reduction every 20 years on this technology. So I've got a very, very simple chart, and you can look at it. And petascale computing, by the way, the biggest supercomputers in the world right now are about 10 petascale at Lawrence Berkeley Labs just down the street. They've got 2 of them under construction. Petascale is about the level people think people are at pattern recognition. So exascale is probably closer to the level of our brain. So reasoning, pattern recognition is pretty well solved with deep learning if you have enough data. And if you have petascale computing, you can implement things very, very well. Exascale is going to be probably required for reasoning. IBM just signed a deal with MIT. We're giving $240 million over the next 10 years to work with MIT on a number of new things. But basically, the biggest thing is trying to figure out how do we use quantum computing for artificial intelligence to get the energy levels down so we can get to exascale. But I think the biggest risk is as machines get smarter and smarter, and they will, if we're not careful, it'll lead to a de-skilling. People will start getting lazy. That's human nature. We'll start letting the machine do more and more for us. And that's, I think, the bad path. And I remember when I worked at Apple before I worked for IBM, and Steve Jobs would say, think about the bicycle and think about the car. We want to build bicycles for the mind, because a bicycle makes you stronger. As you're using it, you're getting stronger. A car makes you weaker. So we have to make sure, as we design this world with smarter computers, smarter machines, we're designing a world that helps people get smarter, more capable, more ambitious. But the risk is that we could design a world where people have less skills because they don't need the skills. The system will do it for us. Just trust the system. It's smarter than we are. So we really have to be careful about that, I think. There's more to say, but I'll leave it right there.
We'll take some questions after
Sure.
that. Let's give it to Vikram Chandra, NDTV, and thank you.
Hello, everyone. So for those of you who not quite sure what my background is, so I've been a TV journalist for all my life. I've been a reporter, TV anchor doing the 9 o'clock news. So, yesterday I was with Mohan in a car, and he was asking me that what's the scariest thing you've ever done in your life? And I was sort of thinking about interviewing terrorists in Kashmir and, going to the Siachen Glacier in the middle of a war and all of that. But frankly, this probably comes close, because you're coming as a reporter to Berkeley, to Silicon Valley, and you're trying to talk to people here about artificial intelligence. Now, I've heard of the fact that artificial intelligence, that entire debate about artificial intelligence versus natural stupidity. Now, this is a fairly stupid thing to be doing out here. So I'm going to start off by confessing my ignorance, because obviously I'm not going to talk to you about combinatorial explosions or, back propagation of algorithms or even neural nets, none of that sort of stuff. Instead, I'm going to utilize the 4 or 5 minutes that I'm going to speak to really talk a bit about a more layperson's view of artificial intelligence, and more specifically, the way the media is seeing it. Because artificial intelligence is now getting into the media. It's getting into the media in 2 ways, and that's what I would like to talk to you about. One, the way the media is talking about it. Sometimes it's great when you're building out a technology and no one's talking about it because it's happening under the radar. When the media starts to talk about it, it starts to get a lot of attention, it starts to attract a lot of government scrutiny. That can be good, that can be bad. Governments can come in and push it and say, let's try and encourage it and get work happening and let's get innovation happening. But that could be good and that could be bad. Sometimes that can kill innovation. So which way is media looking at artificial intelligence? And the second thing that I'd like to talk to you about is how can the media itself take advantage of artificial intelligence and some of its implications there. In a sense, media discussions of artificial intelligence, especially in the recent past, have been sort of around the theme of that super intelligence that you were speaking about. And that's maybe a little distance away, but it makes for a far more exciting or a sensational story. And you can understand why that particular theme has started to resonate, because exactly that same concept of Moore's law that you're talking about and the concept of doubling makes it clear that at some point or the other, these artificial intelligence systems are going to get smarter and smarter and smarter. Neural nets right now may be less smart than a sea slug is, but if you continue to double it often enough, then 15 years or 20 years or 25, maybe 30 years later, it'll be at the capability of a human brain. And especially when you're starting to talk, maybe it could be longer than that. Who knows how long it's going to take, but it's a real possibility. And when you're talking about people starting to program these machines and algorithms into being general all-purpose learners, which means that you're moving from narrow intelligence towards general intelligence, then that starts to throw up all sorts of questions and potential ethical concerns. Are those machines from that point onwards going to be smarter much faster? And it doesn't help that a lot of people have been seeing these scary stories about, from the moment the artificial intelligence systems reach the level of artificial general intelligence at human level capabilities, from there to go to artificial super intelligence, which is 500 times or 1,000 times human capabilities, may not be a matter of years. It may not even be a matter of months. I've seen some estimates, as I'm sure you have, where it could be a matter of hours. And that's starting to scare people. And you're hearing Elon Musk and others talking about it, and Stephen Hawking. So yes, the media is looking at it. And I think it's important to do this purely from the point of view that all of you as artificial intelligence researchers and the work that's happening elsewhere need to start thinking about what happens with the control of this. Should you be having development happening on machines that are linked to the internet, as one simple example? Should you be having kill switches baked into the very core of the systems which people are working into the open source, as it were? Because I'm sure that here in the US, all of you will be exercising adequate control. But not all the research, not all the development is going to be taking place here. You will be having people in North Korea who could be working on systems, and God knows what they're doing with it. You're having people in China doing it, and you're not completely sure what conditions they're doing some of their research in. Russia. There could be a lot of people who could be building coding on top of some of those open source platforms that we are seeing out here, and there could be risks attached to it. And the risks are so existentialist and so big that even if there's a 0.001% probability that things could get out of hand, it's worth looking at. And that, again, to your point, Jim, it could be not just the technology, it could be bad people not knowing, not willfully doing something wrong with it, but accidentally doing something wrong with it. And that, I think, is a real challenge that we have to look at. So from the media's point of view, artificial intelligence is really being looked at from one of two possibilities. It's going to destroy the world. That's the sensational view that many people are going to take. And that makes for good headlines, and therefore it's getting a lot of attention. And others in the media are also looking at a slightly different possibility, which is it could dramatically transform the world. And that's a very real possibility, perhaps a higher possibility. At the level of super intelligence, almost certainly it'll transform the world. It'll cure cancer, it'll solve all communication problems, unlimited free energy, unlimited free food, all of that sort of stuff starts to happen if you get to super intelligent capabilities. But even at levels much lower than that, it does start to transform the world, far more fundamentally. And to some extent, we're already seeing that happening, not even at the level of artificial general intelligence, but with simple narrow intelligence. And narrow intelligence, those systems obviously are up and running. At the most basic levels, I think a lot of us have already reached the level where we will start trusting some forms of artificial narrow intelligence more than we'll trust ourselves. Living in Delhi, I do that every single day. I would never dream of setting off into Delhi traffic without seeing what Google Maps has to say on it. And I've lived in Delhi all my life. I would trust my own intelligence on most things, but if Google Maps tells me this is not the way to go, I will trust it. So you're already reaching levels of that in various forms of narrow intelligence where you're trusting that artificial intelligence more than you're trusting your own. And 9 times out of 10, it's actually correct. And you can get into recommendation engines and Spotify and Apple Music telling you what sort of music you will like. Quite often, these systems are good. And quite often, these systems are right. And that's the profound transformation that's happening. And I think that's going to accelerate. And I think you're going to see the next 10 to 15 years are probably going to be the most transformative era in human history in many ways. It's possible that as a 10-year period, this is when a lot of transformation is going to take place. And 2 things are going to happen. It's not just going to be artificial intelligence. It's going to be a combination of 2 big revolutions. The platform revolution, which we're already seeing, where pipeline business after pipeline business, whether it's the hotels or the hospitality business, whether it's transportation, you name it. The number of businesses where pipeline businesses, which are business to consumer, have got completely disrupted and destroyed by platforms. That is going to continue to accelerate. And as you're adding intelligence and artificial intelligence to those platforms, then you get multiple scales, and those network effects become so much more powerful. So that brings me to the second part of what's going to happen in the media. And I think we're already starting to see it where, with Facebook and Google and many others, their algorithms are fast becoming the most dominant media platforms already. If you look at the number of people who are today consuming content, not just news content, but all content, by virtue of just seeing it on Facebook or relying on the Facebook algorithm, that's huge. And the same would be true for Google. There are some of us who feel that that's the future of all of the media. Personally, for example, the reason I quit full-time employment at NDTV a year ago was to start working on the future of video news, which to my mind will be based on a combination of platform technology and art and machine learning to try and deliver more personalized experiences. And that potentially disrupts the entire media business. So 5 years from now, are you going to be ever switching on a news channel on television to be watching what some managing editor at CNN or Fox has decided you should watch? Almost certainly not. And that's 5 years, I'm saying. These things are going to change, and they're going to change fast. Is there risk and a danger in this? Yes, there is, and that's perhaps the last thought I want to leave you with. And the reason for that is that if you look at the last 50, 60 years of human history, it's been a very interesting period of prosperity, of diversity, of inclusiveness. That's because mass media has tended to get a lot of people's opinion in. If you look at old human history, look 100 years back, 200 years back, or 1,000 years back, you would entirely be based on the opinions of your local church, what your local priest was saying, what your village headman was saying, what your neighbors in your family were saying, and that shaped your entire viewpoint. The reason we've been such a tolerant, inclusive world for the last 50, 60 years, with dramatic implications for globalization and for prosperity, has been because of mass media and because you've been exposed to a large number of different views. I do sometimes worry whether that's now starting to change. And as already you're starting to see a lot of opinions, and the stories you're seeing and the opinions you're watching are being determined by various algorithms, right? And the algorithms are saying, this is what your friends are watching, your family is watching, people belonging to your religion are believing this particular thing, and therefore this is the opinion that you should see. And you're not seeing other opinions. The latest studies that I'm sure all of us are seeing, you're aware of the fact that what you tend to retweet or you tend to be seeing or retweeting are opinions which are very similar to yours. So we are, in a sense, seeming to be getting back to that village community. And maybe this is for a sociologist or an anthropologist to tell us, but maybe that's the reason why we're seeing so much divisiveness again, both in the United States. Look at the 2 largest democracies on the planet, India, America. Both places we're having the same sort of discussion. Are we losing the ability to have different opinions? And hopefully that is something that we should sit and have a broad-based engagement and a discussion on as to how that will shape. Because just that point that I was making about the change of human history, look at the amount humans changed, the human species, in the first 50,000 years. How much did we change? Not much. Next 1,800 years, we changed. 20th century, dramatic changes, massive changes. Look at the 21st century already. People forget 10 years ago there was no iPhone, there was no Facebook, there was, well, Facebook had just about started, no Twitter. What's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years is going to be a totally new world. And we do need to all make sure it is a better world. Right, thanks.
Thank you for those remarks. And right now, it's good to hear from Facebook, Anand Chandrasekharan, and see what Facebook has to say about AI.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'll keep the remarks short as well, since Professor Solomon Darwin has already advertised food being outside in a little while. So as I was thinking about this, given that it's a lot of folks who are making very senior level decisions that might impact their businesses and their bottom lines, and technologies like AI and how they're going to impact not just technology businesses, but every business. What I thought I would do is just answer maybe top 3 questions that I had in my mind as I was thinking about not just AI, but how new technologies like AI become more mainstream. The first question is, how did this come to happen, right? Why are we talking about AI now? And why are we doing it now as opposed to a couple of years back or a couple of years in the future? And what trends have conspired to make this so profound now? The second question is, what are some of the things that are going on that are worth following? There are what capabilities are possible now and what is worth following for, not just if you are planning to work in AI your entire life, but if you're interested in the impact that it might have on a large business or an industry. And then the third is just what could be some of the larger societal impacts as a result of this. I think we've both in this panel as well as societally, we've had like debates around is AI good or AI bad, and famously, Elon and Mark had like a back and forth on, is AI good or bad? And so definitely people are worrying about, and I really like this, the thought that Jim had around it's not good or bad technology, it's just good or bad people. So I'll just talk a little bit about that. So I think the rise of AI is really the rise of computational power, right? I think that has really been the big story behind the rise of AI. I remember I was an undergrad student in India like many years ago, and my final year thesis was on neural networks. And I thought it was really interesting. The Japanese were making washing machines better by using neural networks at the time. And I was strongly urged not to work on this topic because it had no future. It had no potential back then, like over 15 years ago. I kept going back to that because actually some of the neural network algorithms are very similar to what people were working on 15 years ago. And what changed is both the scale of computational power that's available, as much as and that's a huge trend, as well as that I don't have to set it up personally, right? That it is available on demand, and I don't have to worry about scaling it on my end, right? So if everyone left here and said, I need to, so literally when I first heard about one of the frameworks that was available, I tried to take data that I had, which is census data, and do some basic training of the census data to try to get some insight around it, and then use that insight to make some decision about what I should do in the future, about traffic planning or urban planning or whatever that is. And I was shocked that I was able to start and finish training using a framework that I didn't know at all in about 20 minutes. And all I knew was, like, I haven't coded in like 3 or 4 years, actively at least. And no engineering team has allowed me to check in code like in their system in the last 3 or 4 years, thank God. But still, I was able to get training started and finished in about 20 minutes, right? And so while that can be like really funny to think that like I did something that is totally useless, that is really what has made AI so interesting now, is that like people like me can be dangerous with this technology, like in a good way, right? I can go create something. And I think anytime you can run a hackathon around something and a bunch of people can build something in a day, a bunch of innovation starts to happen, right? So I think anyone following the rise of AI like can't ignore the rise of computational power, right? And if you look at Microsoft, Amazon, all of these companies have become cloud companies as much as they are, software companies or e-commerce companies on the back of this growth. So as AI rises, it will rise on the back of the growth of computational power. So anytime you see trends that impact faster, better, cheaper computational abilities, that's going to directly impact AI. I think the other piece that is very interesting is every business has sort of three levers when they think about AI, right? So as you think about leveraging this technology, the first is, what is your algorithm that you're using? And you could start with something really sophisticated and hire PhDs in computer science to develop those, or you could start with something really simple that is sort of run off the mill, it's used in research papers for a long time, et cetera. The second thing that is actually very interesting is what training data are you starting off with, right? And that's why there's sometimes the belief that larger companies have an advantage when it comes to AI, because all things being equal, larger companies have more data about their customers or the industry, and they have the ability to go buy more data. And so the second lever is really what is the starting training data with which that you supply to your algorithm to get trained. And then the third is, what's the speed of experimentation that you're doing, right? And the third is actually probably the most ignored part of this, which is, like, you could start off with a really crappy algorithm, relatively speaking, and you could start off with relatively unsophisticated data, but if your speed of experimentation is really high, you can actually accomplish a lot within a relatively short period, even if you're not a technology company, right? Because a lot of this is pretty readily available. So as you think of sort of how this might be leverageable in sort of any job that folks in this room are in, or business leaders are in, these three levers are available to any business, not just technology companies. And then the other piece I wanted to talk about is, I think the most interesting part of AI is that it's available in places where you least expect it, right? So if, let's say, you've seen people, add like Game of Thrones effects on top of their faces and upload them to Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat, there's actually AI directly involved in those effects. And every time those are applied, the algorithm learns more about what is being done with that, with the data, and gets a little bit more sophisticated the next time. And so the most interesting thing that'll happen, I think next week, when the new iPhone comes out in the event Apple has planned, the biggest part of the new announcement will be the AR capability, or the augmented reality capabilities that'll be baked into the OS. So the OS was announced a couple months ago, but now it'll be baked into the phone. And as everyone knows, 80% of Apple users upgrade within a couple of weeks. And so 80% of Apple users will now be walking around with a machine that uses AI. And so we're not talking about, like, yes, there'll be huge improvements in 5 years, but 2 weeks from now, most people in this room will be walking around with a highly functional machine that can do pretty functional AR. And most AR, again, because of the computational power involved, relies on AI, right? So, the other piece is that it's going to creep up on our lives in like the least expected ways, including, by the way, in some silly ways, right? Like, it'll understand that your face is moving, and the effect will move with your face, and that's AI. So the other piece that I wanted to talk about is, I think a lot of attention, and particularly media attention, as Vikram rightly mentioned, is focused on what is called horizontal AI, which is this notion that there'll be a singularity and machines will be smarter than humans, and the philosophical debate around, is that good or bad, or should we be worried? But what is interesting and receiving far less media scrutiny and media attention is what is in the industry is called vertical AI, right? So this is probably one of the most interesting technology trends that we'll all be a part of, where people with domain expertise as well as computer science knowledge will start to leave industries and build AI companies, right? Where essentially what they're saying is, I understand manufacturing really well. I understand the making of cars really well. I understand aluminum really well. I'm going to go make that system a little bit smarter, a little bit more resilient, a little bit more sort of sensitive around its environment. And so there was a news report that Caterpillar bought a company for $300 million like a couple of days back, which is a vertical AI company, right? So when you think of companies that are potential acquirers of AI technology, you don't really think of Caterpillar at the top of your list. But yet, vertical AI is going to mean that most companies are going to be able to leverage this. And actually, it'll be for very interesting things. Like today, people send out employees and humans to the top of telecom towers, inside oil refineries, et cetera, which are not very safe, right? Like inside mines. And I think, a combination of AI combined with technologies like computer vision are going to make things like that, which, not only is good for humanity because these people are not in these dangerous areas, but it could even impact things like insurance costs, et cetera, because you're not, like the risk of completing those like oil leaks or, leaks because of telco towers not functioning properly, et cetera, is going to be much lesser because they're fairly well automated. The other piece that I talk about, which is very close to sort of what I work on, is there'll also be actual agents. Like there's an agent for those of you who use Facebook Messenger, there's an agent called M that has started to do tasks for people. It'll sort of point out that your colleague has a birthday today, and you can, if you've forgotten someone's birthday, you can go wish that person, all the way to if you're talking about music in a thread, it'll actually surface that song, and you can listen to it as you're talking to someone. And so, again, the part that's super interesting is a combination of the technology in the back end and something that people touch and feel and use every day creates a really strong flywheel for interesting incremental things to be launched really quickly. Like I said, the speed of experimentation really works. And when 1 billion plus people are touching a platform like Messenger or WhatsApp or Facebook, you end up having a lot of training data very quickly against some of the innovations that are launched. So that's the last thing I'll leave you with. Like, again, this was already in a lot of the small technologies that we use on an everyday basis. But to me, what is interesting is that it'll actually impact industries that, you don't wake up and think this industry is going to be profoundly impacted by AI. So extremely interesting area. And overall, I think I have the same view that Jim had earlier, which is there's no such thing as good or bad technology. There could be bad applications of AI because people are motivated by the wrong outcomes. But overall, I think everyone in this room should probably be extremely excited about its potential. And by the way, I don't think its potential is necessarily 5 years out. It's already here and now, and there's a lot that companies can do to both leverage it as well as provide those services to other companies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anand. Before we hear some concluding remarks from PK Agrawal, let's take some questions.
So Anand, you mentioned everything about AI and how AI is growing. And then there's discussion or debates about security, especially data security. So what is a company like Facebook doing to put some sort of checks and balances in place as far as AI is concerned?
So I would say, I think that's an issue that's important even outside of what's going on in AI. I think it used to be that, people who wanted to hack into their girlfriend's account were the people you need to worry about back in the day. But now there's nation states who are thinking about hacking. There are, bad actors within nation states who are thinking about hacking. So, and I think it's true across the board, but particularly as a consumer brand, switching costs are very low, right? Like someone could just shut off their account and go into another service. And so consumer trust is probably the biggest part of this. I think the other part of this is not just the physical security, but also how people feel about the platform. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time internally is talking about, should we have done more ahead of time on the whole election cycle and all the parts of that, right? And that has nothing to do with physical security, but if people feel uncomfortable, for instance, it's in many quarters, it's not very comfortable to share if you're a Trump supporter, right? You fear ridicule, you fear being embarrassed, but it's an opinion, you may be right or wrong. And the thing that we worry about a lot is that it should still be an open place where, if all your friends are in California and are Democrat, you shouldn't be worried about sharing an opinion that you have that may be unpopular. So I think there's the physical security part, and also there's the perceived fear and threat that people have on the platform.
All right, some questions there. A couple of years ago, I had a guest speaker in my class. He worked for the Pentagon for 5 years and protected 5 presidents of the United States. And when he scared my students, he said, you know, I teach open innovation at Berkeley. It's how open innovation propels knowledge and ideation. You know, he said, you know, the people who practice open innovation are not in Pentagon, it's the Al-Qaeda. They find new ways and better ways to how they could destroy. And he scared some of our students. It's not if there's going to be a, he said, what he scared my students ask a lot of questions, but this time they went away without asking any questions. He said, it's not if there'll be a third world war, when, and it's going to be fought very differently. Next question.
Okay, my name is Dr. Ram Reddy. I'm the chairman of CLIck. My question is, we provide voice wherever you want it, whenever you want it. The voice as a biometric, that means each one has its own unique voice. How far we are in using our voice to replace all the passwords?
Well, for every measure, there's a countermeasure, and it's getting easier to simulate anybody's voice, so it's a bit tricky. Yeah, there are things that will have a bigger impact than artificial intelligence over the next 20 years, and we should remember that. Like blockchain, for example. IBM's working with and a lot of companies are working with the Linux Foundation on Hyperledger. And there are things that we can do to redesign our systems to make them much more secure. And I do think that voice will play a very important role in security systems. But we also have to not think that that's the one thing that's going to fix everything, because it won't. There's all sorts of measures, countermeasures. But if it's applied in a way with blockchain, so you have information about, you know, where the person is and other things that might contribute to that, I think it could be, you know, a very important next technology. I don't know if others want to comment on that.
I think the one thing I'll add is, independent of the impact directly of AI, I think voice is also really good inclusivity technology. There are a lot of folks who are less threatened by systems that have voice interfaces and video interfaces. So if I'm consuming video content and I'm talking through voice, even if I'm illiterate, I can have a really sophisticated experience. And so I think on a more broad level, it's actually really important that both of those gain traction for inclusivity. Because like if someone only speaks Telugu or you know, some other language, they usually feel like they're a second-class citizen on the internet because input technologies don't account for their language skills and they can't consume a lot of the content. But you know, as even data consumption in India is showing, regional language content is growing significantly in consumption compared to growth of English language consumption. And even if you look at I was 3 years ago, I worked in India, and I built a music product called Wink, and we were all really excited about all these Warner Music and Sony and all these deals that we did in India. But the really popular songs were like, whatever movie Salman Khan is in, and that song would be the most popular song. And it made me feel a little bit less cool about myself because I liked all the songs that we got, but unfortunately those were not what were popular. It was like Telugu was probably the #1 language of consumption, not Hindi, not English. And so I think like voice and video will actually be a huge inclusivity factor, if nothing else.
So there seems to have been a theme through the day that I've noticed where technology will come into life more and more and human jobs will be lost as we proceed. So is there a way artificial intelligence can be brought in to say upskill somebody? Let's say a coal miner loses his job, and now what do you do with him, and how do you help him out socially? Can it be assumed that artificial intelligence can teach a person that is assumed not to have a good basic education in a manner that is tailored to his or her way of learning effectively, that they become useful, members of society and gainfully employed, even though their roles may change?
Yeah, again, I'll jump in on this. So this is a great question, and there's something in education called the 2 sigma effect. If everybody had a personal tutor, you could get a 2 sigma improvement in their capabilities. And absolutely, this is a great application area for artificial intelligence that can have a huge positive impact on society. And it's certainly one that we're investing heavily in, and it's going to be very transformative.
Can you give a specific example? Let's take that coal miner. How would it be tailored?
Well, so everything, you have to look at the context that people are in and their family context and so forth. But if if a person had, I'm not saying the coal miner is going to become an AI programmer or a data scientist, but if they aspired to do that, then certainly having those technologies would help them do that. But it's probably more likely that there's opportunities available in a region that make sense for a person, and there would be, I was just in northern Georgia, for example, and as I was driving around, there was a real focus on local agricultural products in the restaurants. So there were restaurants that only served food that came from within 50-mile radius. And a lot of the people who had certain types of jobs were also using their land for agricultural purposes. So I think it's not that everybody's going to be an AI programmer or a data scientist. I think having these intelligent tutoring systems that can provide one-on-one support will augment a person's ability to fit into the local opportunities much better. To amplify that, just like I think blockchain is going to have a much bigger impact maybe than artificial intelligence in terms of creating a trust economy, material and energy science are also going to have a huge impact. Like today we think of everything coming from China, but if you go back 100 years, things were produced locally. And so there's huge amounts of new job opportunities that are going to come from local circular economy. Already, when buildings are torn down in Silicon Valley, I remember when they were building the Apple complex, there was a big HP complex. They took those buildings apart, they recycled the concrete right on site. Certain types of material flows will become much more local. So I think there's going to be like 16 different technologies that are going to transform society in the next 10 to 20 years. Artificial intelligence will be one. You also mentioned augmented reality. I think augmented reality can probably have a bigger impact than artificial intelligence. So these intelligent tutoring systems that help people learn, it's not just an intelligent tutoring system. It might be, gee, I need an accountant, or I need somebody who has legal expertise, and if you can get a digital worker to be your accountant, a digital worker to be your legal expert, you can become an entrepreneur and take advantage of all of these other material flow, energy flow, lots of different technologies that you can configure to essentially make your families much more independent than they were, 10 years ago. So what we saw over the last 200 years is we saw independent families become dependent on a global economy. And now with these new technologies for local material energy flows, local expertise and skill through the digital workers, you're going to see the kind of reverse, and things will create lots of different opportunities that are even hard to imagine. But anyway, that's how I see the whole flow. And again, my slides up on SlideShare have a lot more material about this.
Yeah. So if any product that has to be complemented over the last decade to actually transform and dissipate the knowledge and the information to to the village or the, the people on the ground is actually the social media. And I've worked with many villages on the social front, and I feel very glad that, at that level, they already have the information before I talk to them, that, from the local journalist and, from the national journalist also. But with that positioning of being a kind of very innovative company or the social media company, also comes a responsibility of validating and authenticating the news that is being thrown. So I think the artificial intelligence, the biggest use case for you should be on authenticating and validating the news item is correct. And second is validating the profiles through which that is being shared. So my question to you is like, are you already doing something on that front, or do you plan to do something?
So I think there were two things that recently launched, sort of in response to, in the US, what happened last November and some of the reaction to that. One, there is such a thing as like fact checking, right? Like there are experts who do fact checking and correlate that with the past and what is referenced in an article. And so articles that gain traction within Facebook, for instance, are now actually fact checked. And these fact checkers are actually paid to be neutral and kind of do a good job, just like they would in any high quality journalism outlet. And they can mark something as like factually not true. The other piece that involves AI a little bit more is where you can correlate. So any bad actors, rather than tracing it to like a country or whatever, you can trace it to accounts. So it's usually the same people that keep exhibiting repeated bad behavior, right? This is true of any system. Like if you want to know in any small town, if you want to cut crime, you just go after the worst criminals, right? And crime goes down. So like it's usually like reduced to a small number of bad actors. And so we're using technology to sort of see repeated negative behavior, especially if they are tagged as sharing news that's not true in the past. So their shares in the future are automatically de-emphasized. And the third part is when someone is getting one point of view, to use technology to also surface the opposite point of view. So if, for instance, there is a publication that is well known to be left-leaning in the US, for instance, to surface something alongside it that is well known to be right-leaning. So you have like multiple perspectives on the same story.
I was just up visiting a company in San Francisco, Discord, and their founders were talking about this great technology they got from Facebook for identifying bullying behavior in online worlds. What's the name of that technology?
It's called X-ray.
X-ray, yeah. That's detecting bad actors and helping communities deal with those situations, yeah.
We are talking so much about AI. Just wanted to understand how the relationship between man and woman is going to change, say by 2050. How is it like two robots? So just wanted to hear your perspective.
But if I can just come in on that, if you at Davos this year in the World Economic Forum, they showed this robot who was arguably you could make her sort of sit out here with a wig, and a lot of people would just walk through and saying that's one of the most attractive people I've ever met. Still not at the Westworld sort of I'm going to marry that person sort of a level, but who knows where it's headed. You want to add to that?
No, I would just say the speed of experimentation will increase on that also.
Computing advantages that has got us here. Could you comment from your opinion and experience of what in computing would take us to the next step? What's needed in hardware technology improvements? Thank you.
I mean, I would say, so I think some people actually, in the industry call it Amazon tax, where every company that gets started has to pay a certain amount of money every month to a company like Amazon to continue to operate, right? Because they need their hosting, they need their cloud services, they have databases, etc. There are multiple companies that are very successful in that world. I think one company that's famously never had private cloud as they've grown to 150, 160 million daily users is Snap. So Snap doesn't have any cloud services. They just use a public cloud hosting facility, and they've grown their capacity as the company has grown. So basically, as both your scale grows as well as your computational needs grow with that scale, and both could grow at the same time, or one could grow and the other could stay flat. All the resources that are required are available on demand, right? So in the past, people used to spend a couple of years building those resources internally, and that almost used to be a competitive advantage that large companies could have. Now, like a small company that's growing really fast doesn't have to build that setup. It's available on demand. The other piece is that all of the stack is available on demand as well. And so, like I said, and then the third part I would say is, so if you watch the news today, Microsoft has an AI framework called PyTorch, and Facebook has one called Cafe 2, and the two are now interoperable. So if, let's say, you grew up learning one framework and all your development is in that framework, you can now sort of write in one framework and it'll work with devices, for instance, that might follow the other framework. So let's say you've built some interesting like education, tutoring AI technology, and let's say it's built on like Cafe 2, which is Facebook's platform, and let's say someone has a Windows phone and it doesn't have the Cafe 2 framework, and it has Microsoft's AI, the same effect will work on that framework. So I think the industry is learning also from the last generation of lack of interoperability and building those early on, which I think is a really, really good idea for the industry. So it's less one big step and more, all the collective steps that have happened, say, in the last 5 to 10 years.
All right, we have some concluding remarks here by P.K. Agrawal, but let me kind of summarize a couple of things that were said here. When I was in a school in India, in a village school on dirt floor, I used to do math in my head. But when I came to the United States, I need my calculator. My son does even simple math. He has to, use the calculator. So there's capabilities that I'm not developing that I once did in India with math. That's the only way we did it. And when I came here in the 70s, they used slide rule, and everyone was using a slide rule to get the math while I was doing it, sitting next to them and doing it in my head. So I'm coming from India. But now we are so dependent on this technology that we're losing some capabilities, like Jim is saying. That concerns me a bit. My son got into Berkeley, but if I give him goes to the grocery store, how much does this cost? He has to really use his calculator. I heard that IBM hires the best of Harvard top 10, and they called up the top 10 people and asked them the same question, the last question at the end, individually. What is 7 times 3? And they all gave different answers. And the last guy went home, and his grandma asked me, Sonny, how did you do? She said, Grandma, I'm from Harvard, I'm the top 10, I'm sure the job is in the bag, I got it. And at the dinner table, she said, as she's clearing the plate, what was the last question they asked you? They said, well, some stupid question like, what is 7 times 3? And Grandma said, I hope you said it's 21. He said, 21? I said 22. He went into his calculator and said, I'm wrong. But the next day he got a call from IBM, and they said, you got the job. I said, I got the job, I can't believe it. So he went over there, and the guy said, he was giving the tour. These are your vice presidents. This is your division and Asia division. And the guy said, I'm perplexed because, that's 7 times 3. And the president said, before he even finished the sentence, we know you said it's is the wrong answer, but you're the closest. The other guys were way off. That's how it is nowadays. And but on the other hand, I hate coming to Berkeley every day because I live in Pacifica. It takes about an hour I used to hate coming because it's a dead time, but now I love it because Siri reads my emails, I send texts, I get all my office work done before I come to Berkeley, and it does the job of so many assistants. I make all the calls, I get my day organized in the car while I come. And most of the time I'm sitting in the parking lot, even not leaving, because I'm still talking to Siri, having her do all these other things. You know, so in some ways it is good, in some ways it's the other way, and so I guess we need to make some choices here. And with that, I'll have P.K. Agrawal deal with the final comments.
Right? I have friends in high places. That's how it must have happened. I mean, that's, you know. And I know particularly when Solomon has already introduced the concept of pakoras. And I'm sure most of you are listening to me and saying, as soon as he shuts up, we can get the pakoras. You know that somebody once told me there are 3 rules of making a speech when you're the last speaker. Unfortunately, nobody knows what these rules are. That, you know, but I know one rule, be brief, right? That, you know. So what I want to do is that I have just 3 or 4 quick observations, but I do have advice on pakoras. That's what I end up with, that, you know. Yeah, and bhaji, yeah, and wine. So anyway, first of all, thank Jim and Anand and Vikram for bringing real intelligence to the topic of artificial intelligence. Thank you, that, you know. So just quick observation for the event. There was a lot of conversation about what we call the brand India. And I have my own story, and I'll summarize in 30 seconds. When I came here to US 40 years ago, it was primitive India. All about snake charmers and maharajas, very primitive. If you want to ever watch, you want to throw up, watch the movie called Gangadeen. It's a 50s movie. That's the image of India in the US. Then we moved to 70s with Ravi Shankar and Beatles, the spiritual India. And that was a very interesting part, yoga, Maharishis, you know, Beatles, and so on and so forth. Starting with 90s, with all the IT stuff, we moved to what you can term as business India. And business India was India as a merchant of IT. Not global merchant of IT. We have something to sell you. But I think we are moving through the next phase, which is called the cool India. And you guys are making India cool. It's a long story, but I just wanted to kind of give you a generational perspective on how it's evolving. And it's exponentially harder at each stage. So I just want to make that observation. The other thing I learned today is that India really, when it comes to entertainment, India has 2 exports, Bollywood and politics. And both play very well with the diaspora. And, okay, on the business of AI, I think AI is happening at the machine level, but actually what's really happening in parallel, what's going to make AI real, is the disappearance of the keyboard. It's the IoT story. Because we're going to talk to these machines with the 5 senses. And that's really what's going to make the AI very real. You know, audio is already happening, you know, video is happening, you know, smells are starting to happen. But it's all really a sensor story at the front end. And so I call it the disappearance of the keyboard. That's going to make AI real. We talked earlier about the economics of AI with the disappearance of jobs. Actually, the answer is very simple. The answer is simply this. Who decided that the work week is going to be 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day? If we all work 1 hour a day in the machine age of AI and eliminate all the mundane jobs, the question really is, are the haves willing to give up to the have-nots? Because haves are going to own the machines. So it's a really simple question, and if they don't, we'll have a revolution, because otherwise capitalism comes to an end. That's the fundamental question. It's not about what happens to the jobs. It's what happens to the 1%. That's going to be the question. And finally, we somehow assume that AI is some sort of a pure intelligence. I think Vikram pointed out perfectly there are 2 kinds of AI. One is the functional AI, read the mammograms at 99% accuracy, or do some functional things. But the social intelligence of AI is already showing up. Because we're going to teach the machines just like we teach a child. So if we teach a child to be racist, sexist, misogynist, whatever, the machines are the same way. And when machines learn that, that's even much harder to reverse that. And so already events where in New Zealand, the passport office kept telling a Chinese person, open your eyes are closed. Because we already taught the machines what eyes look like. Guess who taught them? You know, there was a beauty contest in UK where all the women who were the winners had the same characteristic, blue eyes and blondes. Guess what nerdy guys taught this machine? So I think fundamentally we have too much faith in the machines. Think about it, that somebody's going to teach these machines like Tinder, like, this is good, this is good, this is a cat, this is a dog, and whoever is teaching the machines is going to teach the machines. So I don't have any faith in all this AI stuff. Yes, functionally, yes, but on the social level, they're going to cause, in fact, once it gets into the machine, it's even harder to undo. At least you can kill or put the wrong guy in jail, or you can, teach them out of the, kick them out of the company. So anyway, these are just some observations to help you think in the social context. I promised you it would be brief. So here's the pakora story. They'll actually help you, encouraging you to eat pakoras. So French people eat a lot of fat. And they have fewer heart attacks than Americans and Canadians. And Japanese eat very little fat, and they have fewer heart attacks than Americans and Canadians. Chinese people drink very little red wine, and they have fewer heart attacks. You get the trend, right? I don't want to keep repeating it. On the other hand, Italians drink a lot of red wine, and they have fewer heart attacks, blah, 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 blah. So if you're scientific, a lot of your left-brain people, and you put all this together, the inevitable conclusion is that eat or drink what you like is speaking English that kills you. So with that, thank you.